Welcome to Green is Good today, and we're here today with an amazing guest, the Reverend Canon Sally Bingham, and she's asked us just to call her Sally. And Sally, you have a resume that it would take me literally the whole show to read to our wonderful listeners. Please, welcome to Green is Good and share your story. How did you go back at 45 years old and want to become, go into become a priest?
Well, thanks for having me on the show. And I must say, when I went back to school, it was not with the intention of going for holy orders. I went back to school to figure out where the disconnect was between what we as Episcopalians, Christians, say we believe in and then how we behaved. And it was so frustrating to me that I had never heard a person from the pulpit talk about saving creation, even though we sit in the pew and we profess a love for God, we profess a love for creation, and we pray for a reverence for the earth. And yet, we weren't behaving as if we really had a reverence for the earth. So off I went to school to find out why was there this disconnect, and it was eventually clear to me that if clergy weren't going to talk about this from the pulpit, maybe that's what I was being called to do. So that's how I got there.
Well, how did you get the idea to rally people of various faiths to get in to the environmental movement, and especially with the fight against climate change?
Well, if you go deep into our theological roots about God putting Adam in the garden to till it and to keep it, and Jesus saying, what you do to the least of us, you do to me, and love your neighbor as yourself, well, it just began to resonate with me that if you love your neighbor as yourself, you don't pollute your neighbor's air, you don't pollute their water, you don't poison their land or soil, and yet, as I said before, this disconnect. We say we believe in all these things. We say we love our neighbors, and yet something like climate change comes along, and we find out that, in fact, we are destroying the stability of vulnerable communities around the world with our behavior. That didn't sound Christian to me.
So wait a second. You're an at-home mom. You're 45 years old. You have 3 children, and you decide to do this. 2 questions. Prior to you deciding to go do these studies, were you already recycling at home and watching how you manage your carbon footprint? And what did your kids think of all this when you said mom said she was going to go study, go back and go do these new studies?
You asked me a lot of questions all at once.
I know.
But was I recycling? Yes, because I live in San Francisco where that's what we do.
Okay.
But certainly not as much as I do now, because I got into this work because I felt that we as Christians were being hypocritical, saying that we believe in one thing and behaving another way, and therefore, once I started this ministry, I had to clean up my act as much as possible. So I drive an energy-efficient car, I compost, I walk mostly if I can, I cut down on the amount of air travel, and I do all those things that help me be a good steward of creation. But that, more or less, came along. The deeper I got into my ministry, the deeper I got into my own personal behavior, and I don't buy a lot of stuff I don't need, and I encourage other people to just really take what they need from our natural resources and out of stores. Now, then you asked, how did my children feel about it? They were pretty excited because my daughter had already graduated from college when I graduated, so she was actually the first one to finish college. My son was at the University of California when I was over going to seminary, and we were right next door to each other. We could actually meet for coffee. I think maybe a little embarrassing for him that his mother was in college and we were going out to coffee together.
This is great.
But underneath it all, I think quite proud. My youngest child was still in grammar school, and again, he was pleased. They've been very proud of me, and they've been very supportive. And at my ordination, they presented me to the bishop.
Wow.
How cool is that?
This is as great as it gets. Your story is just amazing. So I know you've recently written a book, Love God, Heal Earth. What was the inspiration for that book? And just share that with our audience.
Well, the thing that's been very interesting about this climate work is that we started out, we have a program, it's called Interfaith Power Light, with a religious response to global warming, which is the tagline, programs in 30 states around the country. And when we started, the idea was that congregations would cut their carbon footprints. They'd put in energy-efficient appliances, change out light bulbs. If they could, they'd put solar on the roof and then serve as an example to the community. And that was our goal. And then we found that Episcopalians were doing it, Presbyterians were doing it, Baha'is were doing it, Jews were doing it, and Muslims were doing it, and all these different, often in conflict with one another, different religions were coming together, sitting at the table saying, we are the stewards of creation. We're going to sit here and we're going to talk about climate change, and we're going to talk about being stewards of the earth, and we are not going to discuss where we came from or where we're going when we die. We're not going to get into the differences of our theology. We're going to sit here and talk in solidarity that we are the stewards of creation. So the book came about because I wanted to show that this is not, besides being a religious response to global warming, it's also a coming together of all these different religions to stand in solidarity. In the book are 21 essays by all different religious leaders. There's Roman Catholic, there's Protestant, there's Jewish, there's Muslim, there's a Franciscan sister, there's Buddhists, and they're all giving their version of why we are the stewards of creation. So it's kind of the unintended consequence of putting this ministry together, and I wanted everyone to know, look, all these different religions that often are in arguments with one another are agreeing on this topic.
So you're focusing on what ties us together and what's similar for us all instead of what our differences are.
That's right.
That's wonderful. And our listeners can go to your website, interfaithpowerandlight.org, to buy the book. So I'll mention that later again, but interfaithpowerandlight.org to buy that book. So when did the book come out?
It came out in February. So
great. And how's it going so far?
10 months ago.
And how's it going so far?
Well, amazing. It's amazing because there are lots of clergy now around the country who haven't really thought about this before, but
right.
They would like to preach something on the environment. If it's an imam, they can pick up this book and see what two other imams are saying about it. If it's a rabbi, same thing. If it's a Catholic priest, same thing, because we have all these different denominations represented there with very good biblical backup on what it is they're trying to say and the message they're trying to get out.
So, Sally, we have 2 minutes before we have to go to commercial, and you said you're in 30 states. What is the biggest difference Interfaith Power and Light has made to date, and what's your real goal here with your great organization?
Well, we have 10,000 congregations that are participating in this campaign. We would like to have every congregation in America participating in it, but even if we could just double that over the next 3 to 5 years, that would be success. If we could have a program in all 50 states, that would be success.
How about other countries?
Well, we have one in Australia and we have one in Sweden. Isn't that amazing?
That's amazing.
Yes, I've been both those places to do a presentation on how to get a program like this started.
Wow.
And we'd like to see the religious community leading the environmental movement.
We like it, and so you do you have your own congregation in San Francisco, or are you mostly on the road spreading your wonderful word of environment and faith and where we should be going?
I'm on the road a tremendous amount, but I do have a congregation here. I work out of Grace Cathedral. It's a big Gothic cathedral on the top of Nob Hill, and I'm the environmental minister there.
Wow, that is just so. Well, I just want to tell our listeners that we got Reverend Sally Bingham on today. She is one of the foremost experts in the world with regards to how faith and environment can work together and how we should be making them work together. Come on back on the other side and hear Reverend Sally at Green is Good.
If a little green is good, more is even better. Now, back to Green is Good with John Shigarian and Mike Brady.
Welcome back to Green is Good. Today we're both honored and humbled to have the Reverend Sally Bingham on the show with us, who recently wrote the book, Love God, Heal Earth, and you can buy that book, Love God, Heal Earth, on interfaithpowerandlight.org. Sally, there's so much going on right now. I mean, before Al Gore won his Nobel Peace Prize, his Academy Award, and his Emmy Award in 1 year, how was the political and the social and media climate for climate change, no pun intended, and how do you find it now? Is the wind at your back as opposed to being in your face before then, or what's going on?
Well, there has been some change there, very definitely, because Al Gore's movie, An Inconvenient Truth, has had a lot of influence on this whole subject. And I do think that about 3 years ago when that film came out, and we showed it, in fact, we showed it in 4,000 churches, mosques and synagogues around the country to people who probably would not pay money and go and see it in a movie theater because they thought that if Al Gore was for it, they were going to be against it. Go back 5 years, and it was a pretty controversial subject, and there were lots of people who thought it was just a hoax that the scientists were putting over on the American people. And then when Al Gore came out, who is a Democrat and who is seen as a liberal person, you had your conservatives in the South who said it can't possibly be true. So nevertheless, because we showed this film for free in congregations that people trust, people do usually trust their houses of worship, they could go in and see this film for free. And we got numerous letters from people saying, thank you so much for making this available, because I never would have gone to the movie theater to see it, but I saw it in my congregation. So the short answer to your question is yes, An Inconvenient Truth has had an enormous influence. However, the other big event that happened was Katrina, because we have always said that while climate change is not creating any more hurricanes than have occurred in the past, climate change is making storms more severe. The scientists have said that, and we're definitely seeing it happen. Well, the severity of Katrina can be attributed to the warming of the oceans around New Orleans. And who got hurt the most when that storm hit and who suffered the most? The poor people. And we have always maintained that it is going to be the poor and vulnerable communities, both here and around the world, who are suffering the most now and will certainly later, and don't have the resources to protect themselves from these kind of catastrophic events. Now that makes it a religious issue, and it gave, which is too bad it had to happen this way, but it gave an enormous boost to the message that Jesus said, which is, what you do to the least of us, you do to me. And people saw that, and it became a social justice, religious issue for folks who were thinking about climate change.
That's an amazing point.
And, you know, we see it out in the South Pacific. You have islands that are going underwater due to sea rise, and that island of Tuvalu, which is petitioning to move to Australia, and I think Australia said, no, you can't come, because they were so afraid that if all the islands in the South Pacific go underwater, they'd all be moving to Australia. And I think that the people from Tuvalu have been accepted now in New Zealand, because they know that in the next 50 years they will have no island. And what those South Pacific islands are seeing is water contamination, because the salt water is getting into the groundwater that used to be pure but now is becoming salt, and they're losing the really life, because they depend on water to live.
Let's talk about our recent election. So Barack Obama gets elected president of the United States now in a post-Al Gore Academy Award world. More hope? More hope for your cause? More hope for what you're doing?
Yes, there is more hope. I mean, Obama understands this situation, and I think even beyond the global warming issue, because I think he recognizes that there are some folks who still think that this isn't happening, but what he's been able to articulate, and which is absolutely true, the things that we would do to prevent catastrophic climate change are the same things that we need to do to boost the economy, create jobs, and save money.
Cap and trade, a good idea?
Oh, I think so. Absolutely. I think that we have to put a cap on greenhouse gases, and in order for businesses and big corporations to embrace that idea, if they can cap their greenhouse gases and make money doing it by trading, they'll do it. If they just get taxed on it, they're probably not going to do it.
You're right.
Or they'll just pay the tax and keep polluting.
Right. Well, now let's fast forward to today. And as we were talking a little bit off the air, Copenhagen just opened this amazing conference. And as you pointed out, it's even called Copenhagen.
Copenhagen, yes.
So tell our listeners what you think of this and what you make of this and what you want to come out of this and what you expect to come out of this great conference.
Well, I wanted, and I'm putting that in the past tense because I don't think it's going to happen, that we would have a really strong, legally binding treaty where 200 nations come together and say, we're cutting our greenhouse gases, we're going to provide the funds for the developing world for renewable technology and for adaptation to the climate change that's already going to happen no matter what we do. I don't think that that's going to happen because our Senate here in the U.S. has been unable to get any legislation through. And most of the eyes of the world are on the United States. Are we serious about this or not? And if we're not serious about it, why should they be? Now, the exciting thing, and where I think there is some hope, is that both China and India have set targets for cutting carbon emissions. And there was talk before this conference started that the developing world was going to have its own treaty, that they were just even going to leave the United States out of it. I don't think that's happening. I think that was a rumor. And right now, because the conference only started 2 days ago, it's pretty hard to predict what's going to happen there. Some of these things can happen so quickly and suddenly in the last few days. But the fact that Obama changed his plans from going now early in the conference to going at the end when all the other international leaders will be there, I think is a really good, strong message to the world that it does matter to the United States. I think what the EPA did 2 days ago is extraordinary, saying we can regulate carbon dioxide through the Clean Air Act, and that just happened. That's very good news, and Obama can take that message to Copenhagen as well.
Right.
So, but more appropriate to my ministry and the subject that we were on earlier is that Ban Ki-moon, the General Secretary of the United Nations, was with a group of religious leaders at Windsor Castle in early November, and I was lucky to have been invited there. And he got up in front of all these religious leaders and said, you religious leaders have a very unique voice and a powerful position, and we want your message in Copenhagen. And he took a statement from all of us, all of these religious leaders who have made commitments to cut our carbon footprints, and the message that he's taking there is, we want you to come up with an international treaty, binding treaty, that will cut greenhouse gas emissions. But whether you do or not, the religious community is doing it, and here's what we're doing. And so we at Interfaith Power Light have presented our 3 to 5 year strategic plan where we want to have programs in every state. We want congregations to serve as an example and cut their own carbon footprints. The Tao in China have a statement inside this little book that he's taking saying that over the next 3 to 5 years they're going to put solar panels on every single Tao temple in China.
Wow.
And the Muslim community has made a statement that is it's quite similar, and the Catholics have a new thing called the St. Francis Covenant that they're sending out to all the Catholic churches in America, saying you need to have an energy audit, you need to get energy-efficient appliances in, and serve as an example to your parishioners so that they'll go home and do it in their homes. So all these things are hugely exciting, and there are a couple of things on the internet right now that show the day-to-day events going on in Copenhagen, and a lot of it has to do with the religious community. There are tons of religious leaders in Copenhagen right now talking about not the numbers and the science, but the moral responsibility that we have as human beings to look after this planet and to take care of the people that come after us.
Wow. I mean, so you really feel that your side of the movement, religious, faith, combined with the environment and climate change, is picking up velocity right now. And coming out of this conference, the velocity is going to continue to grow.
I absolutely do think so, and I think that it will encourage and give a lot of leadership to the U.S. Senate to get something passed about cutting carbon emissions early in 2010.
You know, Sally, we have about 4 minutes left, and there's a couple of important issues. A, it's just not about us anymore. You know, the world really is flat. Thomas Friedman, I believe, is right, and India and China are huge emerging economies that are going both through their industrial and technological revolution at the same time, and at the same time, in many ways hurting the environment while they go through this massive paradigm shifts in their countries, but also they have an eye on green. Do you feel hopeful about getting these countries up to speed with regards to climate change, as you just pointed out your example about China? And are you going over there, and are you preaching, and are you meeting with leaders in those countries in current times?
Well, I am not going to China. I haven't been invited to China. I would certainly go. That country is not as Christian as it is in other parts of the world.
Right.
But that's not to say that the religious message isn't getting out through the Tao.
Got it.
And through the Hindus.
Got it.
But I also want to point out that China, which is now leading the world in their amount of greenhouse gas emissions, not per capita, but overall emissions. However, they have the fastest growing wind energy. They're building wind turbines. They're very aware of the pollution problems. And the reason it's so important that the United States pass emission reduction controls is that China is going to start leading on renewable energy, and the U.S. is going to have to play catch-up. And we've been leading for such a long time. We're going to really fall behind if we don't start making wind turbines and solar panels and doing research on renewable energy right here in this country. Otherwise, we're going to fall behind. You know, Germany is also, well, let's see, China is leading with wind power, and Germany is leading with solar panels.
Right.
And they're creating jobs there. I just read, I think it's in Germany, where the economy is getting this big boost, and they're creating lots and lots and lots of jobs in the manufacturing of wind turbines, you know, making them. It's sort of like the car industry here in the early days. Assembly lines, putting automobiles together. Well, they're doing that in Germany and China with renewable technology now, and the U.S. is falling behind.
Well, you know, Sally, we're down to the last couple of minutes, and you know, when Mike and I read through your resume and all the honors and awards you've won, I just want to know, and I want our listeners to hear this: your legacy. How do you want to be remembered? What's really some of the most important work you've done here? And when you're gone one day, like we're all going to be gone, hopefully to a better place, what do you want everyone to remember you as and by?
Well, I don't know that it's important that they remember me, but I certainly hope that anybody who walks into a congregation or house of worship realizes that with justice, love, and peace, the stewardship of creation is right there on a parallel, that it's just as important. Every religion teaches love, justice, and peace. And if every religion teaches that care for creation, stewardship of our land, our air, and our water is as much a part of faith as any of those other three things, then I feel really that I've accomplished something, and that it's a moral responsibility for people of faith. If you sit in the pew and profess a love for God, then you love creation, and you'll do everything in your power to know that your behavior affects other people, and you'll be careful that you're never destroying one of the natural resources or one of the gifts that God has given us to sustain us.
Well, I'll tell you what, you've both inspired Mike and I today and our listeners. You've given us all faith and hope. I want our listeners to buy your book, Love God, Heal Earth, at www.interfaithpowerandlight.org. Sally, you are truly living proof that not only can one person change the world, but you are also living proof that green is good. So thank you so much for coming on today, and we're going to have you back one day. And Reverend Sally Bingham, you are living proof that green is good.